5:30. So I will call our meeting of Policy and Governance to order. First up on the agenda is to approve our minutes from the February 25th meeting. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, and that brings us to policy review. First up are our 600 series policies and
Sure.
Chase.
Well, good evening. Here we are at P&G again this month, and as has been the case, we kind of continue to get these dialed in. We're happy to take any questions or comments or revisions you all might have, but we basically had 4 in the 600s that we wanted to share, and we start right at the top at 600.G1, the goals and objectives. As Matt and I looked at this and we talked about it as a team, rather than trying to list them all out, given some of the changes of legislation, given some of the work that we've done, even with HRS over the last couple of years, they've not been our guiding documents. So we thought the better approach was to just make this policy refer back to our guiding documents. So really just make it much more brief and change it from the listed goals to just as reflected in our strategic plan and portrait of a graduate. Hot link those there, and we will just continue to update those and bring back the annual strategic plan or the updated strategic plan as we have it set on our calendar. Sorry, I lost my words there for a second. 6031 was our next change, just basic instructional programs, and that was really to change the units that were reflected. That's from the state more than us. And so it's just something that we knew we needed to do based on where our program of studies is and what we're required to do out of the state. 605. Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
For relief, 6031 on page 16 sets out the basic instruction program for students in 3 different grade levels. And 6th grade is included in grades K through 6.
Yeah, we should change that.
Is that still, we're going to maintain that with middle schools?
Well, it's statutory language.
Yeah,
That's true, is it?
Statutory
Or
language.
okay.
So yeah.
Where do you see the reference to 6th grade?
Page 16, the document.
Yeah, that mirror the statutory language.
The
Yeah, there's
third
a
paragraph.
paragraph for kindergarten, and then 1 through 6, and then 7 and 8.
That's how they do it. It's sort of weird, but
Is it chapter 12 related stuff, or?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's because the requirements for 6 are in code, really reflective of an elementary program, Charlie, and then grade 7 and 8 are more junior high focused. So it's just mirroring like Brady's talking about with the code language. So
Okay.
Even though most places are middle school,
Yeah.
they just
Right, they have
continue
not.
to use that same language in there.
when we were participating in that chapter 12 revision, we actually asked them to look at that, and that is not something they brought forward at the time. That was Director Lebo was at the state level at that point, but they didn't make that change in chapter 12 because we had even given them an analysis of how many of the programs throughout the state are actually middle school programs, and they still kept the standards written for K-6.
Okay, thanks.
I'm just doing a quick review of those 2 paragraphs, but we can also go back and look at it. I mean, I know we want to comply with the statute, but there might not be as much difference in between that if we do want to change it to align it.
I'm not sure the language is problematic one way or
Yeah.
another in this policy, but
We can at least flag it, and if not, come back to it next year too. 605.3E4, the request to prohibit a student from checking out specific library materials. This is a form that we didn't have after review with legal counsel based on the last legislative session. This was something they did suggested that we needed, so it was recommended to us, and so we're inserting it there for your review this evening. And then 605.6, internet appropriate use. We added a line to the 4th paragraph. And this isn't a new behavior by us, that student internet usage on district devices is logged and may be accessed by district staff and parents. We've actually talked about that, probably at this table and at the board table around our work with Securely 24 and threat assessment, or excuse me, care assessment. So it's more just transparency, so people know that we are logging it and that it can be accessed. It's not a change in practice, just something I think for transparency's sake that we wanted to add to that policy. those are the 4 changes that we're bringing with the 600 this evening. I'm happy to answer additional questions on those, or questions or thoughts you had on other policies in the 600s.
So that last page, we were doing it, we're just putting it in here, so it's,
Yes.
so it's clear that it's.
It's been, sorry, I'm losing it on my internet apparently switched over to the CFI because I'm having a real hard time getting my internet to work as we sit here. It's a
We
good-
do have a typo there on
There's a
CPA.
typo, yeah, that's
what I was
Yeah,
gonna say.
staff and parents.
Can't have
Oops.
it,
What page is that?
Not 60.
It's 68.
But yeah, Sean, that's something we've done, and it actually is. Oh, Matt, you have to help me out.
It's all right.
Through Securely 24, it's monitored either through an algorithm or something else continuously, and when certain words pop up, it's
Yeah.
flagged and sent to somebody for human review. So it's constantly being reviewed by a third party.
There's an alert tree, and then if we
Yeah.
get a concerning alert, then there's a response. Yeah.
And, and that's for keywords, but, the internet usage is not only being reviewed, but it's being shared. I get a report for Charlie's use of her Chromebook every week on Sunday. So we send it out to parents too. So parents should be getting, if they want to, a notification.
Or do you have to sign up to do that? I didn't know parents could
We
do
talked
that.
about.
You can sign up for more, and so
Yeah.
that was something we tried to be, based on some of this conversation we had with you guys last year, we tried to be a lot more aggressive at the start of the year and ask principals to put in their newsletters more frequently, so parents were aware of all of the tools. Because you can just get those coming at you and coming to you, and then you can also limit some of the functionality of the device or their internet access certain times of the day.
I think you can even download the Securely app.
Yep.
So if
Yeah, I
you
know.
don't want to wait for the
I know
weekly
that.
report, you can,
Yeah.
in
It'll
real
all be in
time,
the
like
app,
pull
yep.
it up and see what
Right,
did
I
my
know parents
kid
would do that.
Google today and what YouTube videos did they watch and
Mhm.
what apps did they use.
Yeah.
Good.
Other questions you guys had on the 600s?
We'll move on to the 500, if I can get this. You ready for everyone? 500?
Yes,
Okay.
let's do that.
So the policies that are listed in the agenda are the ones that we had just kicked back for some additional discussion and for us to look at a couple of things. 501.15 open enrollment transfers. Just reiterating the concept about, or the Cindy District has waived the ineligibility period. We're good with that language as we have it inserted in there, and it referred back or connected with a different policy, and it kind of just restating it again to kind of limit when you would consider waiving the ineligibility period would only be after the other district had waived it or there was a good cause example. That's something the board considered a couple years ago when we moved forward. Kim, on the voluntary transfer one,
You know what, when we reviewed the 500s, Matt had flagged that to let you guys know that we may see upcoming language change because of the Dear Colleague letter. We didn't approve it at the board meeting because it was one that I had pulled, so we just need to approve it at this board meeting, so I brought them back for.
okay.
So it's just got the link inserted there, guys. So what you'll see is a change in the language on the actual website where this link lifts off to. You might remember we've called them equity balance transfers. We wanted to move away from the language around equity, and instead we'll call it SES balance transfers. So that's just a kind of a note for you that it might not be codified there directly in policy, but it will be reflected in a change on the forms.
And then 502.3 student expression and student publication, there was a question at last month's meeting about our inclusion of the sentence that students who walk out may not return back to the building for the remainder of that school day. And we've had some additional conversation about that as a team, and we believe that we would continue to recommend that language be included in the updated policy. Matt, I don't know if you want to say anything
Yeah, I think I've talked to some of you about it individually. I think just a number of reasons, probably safety primarily with kids coming back. I think the other thing from a realistic perspective that I think we just should be honest about, if we had 100 kids waiting outside of a school, we would probably figure out a way to work with a bunch of students that we're returning back to. I doubt we would just keep 100 kids out in the parking lot. But the general idea is that what we want to communicate to them is if they do leave school for a protest, they're not to come back to school. And that's because they've been away from us, they've engaged in a lot of other activities. It's also hard at that time to make sure that we're just allowing students of that campus back into that building. You can imagine a huge mass crowd, trying to filter through that. That would be a challenge with a bunch of kids coming back to make sure we didn't pick up a student from another school that's now entered that campus, or a kid that's not even enrolled in the district for that matter. So, several reasons we don't want to do that. We haven't had many walkouts this year. Probably jinx that. Probably have like 6 before the end of the year now. But yeah, so get ready for those. But in general, like Chase said, we'd recommend keeping that language.
I think we can communicate this to parents or
We do communicate that in our language when if we become aware of a potential walkout or protest, we send a communication every time to parents. Yeah. Then people think we're encouraging the
Encouraging
protest,
them.
which we're
Yeah.
not. We're just trying to make you aware that your kid may leave campus today, and we want you to know.
So 502.9 interviews of students by outside agencies. That last sentence was students would not be taken from school without the consent of the principal and without proper warrant. There was some confusion on that, and you all were kind enough to point that out to us, and we agree it was confusing, and we did check with some folks, and we think we understand what it means, but it sends a false sense of hope to families that the principal could just prohibit that, and we know it's not true. We also know the law requires them to have a warrant, but after we talked with legal, and it was just to strike it, and it goes to that point of we don't want to give that false sense of security to families, and we also don't want principals feeling like that if ICE or another agency was there to take a student, it's our expectation that they do something that would prohibit that. And so we're just going to strike that sentence for clarification purposes with regard to that. And plus, this is about interviewing students by outside agencies. That's the other thing I pointed out. Well, that shouldn't be in that policy anyway, because this is about interviews, not necessarily about students being removed from campus. And so, we did want to add that part that we do want principals to contact parents, and we have had this conversation with our parents, with our administrators, that we want you to inform and keep parents informed of the request to be interviewed. But there are those circumstances, like DHS comes in and there's a concern about abuse in the home, where they specifically say, hey, we don't want you to tell the parents that we're here to interview, and so we want to make sure that principals know where that line is in terms of that partnership with parents when they have those situations where someone wants to interview a child in the school building. So not great, and kind of like Matt just said about the walkouts, we don't have this situation come up very often. I think there's been a heightened sense with the current legislative moves at the federal level, but we don't normally find ourselves in these spots, so not a policy we have to rely on a whole lot.
So if the police come and want to talk to somebody, I guess we always tried to call the parent, but if we couldn't get a hold of them, the police said, well, we can talk to them anyway.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, it says school officials can talk to students.
Mhm.
I wouldn't read that as we're authorized, law enforcement officer to talk to a student unless they have a judicial authority to do so.
I think we put ourselves in a difficult spot with parents if we grant that access. So ultimately, yes, the police could, right?
I can
we
remember
usually tell our
trying to
administrators.
call parents and I can't get anybody.
Right.
And so then the officers stand there saying, I can talk to them if I want to.
Yeah, in general with law enforcement, it's their show if they show up, right? And so I think, you know, we're going to advise our admin team they need to comply with law enforcement, but at the same time, we're accountable to parents if we grant that access to a student without their permission. And so like Molly talks about, you make good faith efforts to get a hold of the parents, inform them. Then I think the officers would have to be accountable for the fact their parents weren't present and they interviewed a minor and how that came about. But our best practice and what we ask our administrators to do is to make sure parents are contacted and offered to be present before their kids interviewed by law enforcement.
So the recourse of parents and the student would be to have the parents take it up with law enforcement.
I mean, it didn't happen very often that
Yeah, I know, but I hear.
either way, that police came or that I couldn't absolutely get a hold of anybody. And some parents said, go ahead, they can talk to him without me there. You know, so it
Yeah,
just sort of, yeah,
That's an indication of agreement on the
Right.
parents for the interview.
right.
I mean, and there are some situations, Charlie, where the students are better off if we let the police talk to them when they're at school, even if the parents can't be contacted, because the
Yeah.
police would normally let an administrator be in the room.
Right.
Because if we don't do that, they're just gonna wait off school grounds until the bell rings and maybe try to grab them up then, and then it's even in a situation where we have less potential influence or relationship. So, and we're at a pretty good spot with our local law enforcement, the relationship wise, and have tried to build those relationships in a way that they listen to us and kind of go along with what we ask or try to ask them to abide by as long as it's reasonable. And they understand that we're trying to protect students, and they also understand that we don't want to bring the things in the community onto school campuses, and so they try to really limit those conversations to things that are germane to school and not use the principal's office as a way to try to talk to a kid about something that happened down at the Penn Mall. And so we do try to reasonably work with them, knowing that they're also doing that for us a little bit.
We don't have the whole 500 series in front of us, but you pointed out this is just interviews. Do we have a different 500 policy on police removing students from school? And where I'm going with this
You're
is
gonna
like,
ask me that one.
well, I know, and where I'm going with it is the police may be able to interview a student at school, but they're not going to be able to remove the student unless they have a warrant.
That's
I mean, right.
correct.
So
We do
we're
not-
not just letting the police take kids.
Yeah,
No.
and our
unless they have-
protocol is
Yeah.
that does not happen at school.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we don't let them come past the front office if they don't have a
Yeah.
warrant. We'll let them in the
Right.
building, but if they want to go talk to a student, we're not going to let them walk the halls of,
And
you know,
find-
Penn
Yeah.
to find the student. We're going to make them wait in the office and we'll go get the student. So
Yeah.
yes, there are some limitations on that.
And if we're being honest, like some of this is situational dependent too, right, guys? I mean, like if we were at a basketball game and all of a sudden there's a fight that breaks out and police intervene, they're probably not going to wait for parents to be there to be
Right.
intervened or for us to call parents, right? I mean, they're going to talk to the offenders of that situation. And so in an ideal situation, yes, those are all the steps we take, but that's where I say it's also kind of, at the end of the day, it's going to be their call. You know, we're going to try to, and Chase is right. I mean, we have a good relationship with them. If we say, hey, we need to contact their parents first, they're going to respect that and wait. But if it's a heated situation or, you know, an emergency type situation, that may not all get followed in that scenario.
And the last one is the physical restraint and seclusion. If you remember, this is some things we presented on and some of the work that we're doing to remove the last of our old restraint rooms, you know, seclusion rooms. But there was a question on this policy because it had the word "et cetera" in there. So I went and worked with Ashley, and lists are always hard because you're trying to not be inclusive of everything, and it can change as we change strategies. So we just went with, does not include district implemented instructional strategies. Policies are meant to be broad. That doesn't mean this is the final word on it. We have lots of different trainings that Ashley's team does for paras and others. And so they would get more guidance than just this. So a para is not walking into a situation and be like, well, the only thing they told me is it was an instructional strategy. No, they have a lot more of that in terms of what we qualify as educationally sound restraint. And so, again, that was another good catch that having Setter in there was well, not the best word choice. So thank you for that. And we've been able to remedy that. Those would be the 500s that we were asked to bring back. These are on the agenda tonight for approval. The 600s will come back for a second reading at the next board meeting.
Anything else?
What is going on with board docs?
I don't know.
All right, our next meeting is April 22nd, when we will, and let me guess, we'll do the 700.
700.
Good guess.
Wow. It just gets more.
So good at this
Is there a
job.
pattern?
I mean, it gets more and more exciting as we go down the list.
Yeah.
Start talking operations, finance. It's going to be awesome.
Unity an hour.
It's gonna be great. Is
You better
there,
schedule an hour. That's right.
Yeah.
Operations.
That's right.
is there a motion?
Move to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye. All right, we are adjourned.